Hi, hello, this is Satish Kale. I'm a Middleware Solution Architect with Red Hat, and this video is about creating a sample demo using JBoss BPM Suite 6. Now, just to give you a background, JBoss BPM Suite is a full-fledged BPM solution from Red Hat, and it comes under the flagship of JBoss middleware portfolio, which is within the Red Hat. Now, apart from BPM technology, Red Hat also provides other middleware technologies like integration technologies like Fuse, which is based upon Camel, data virtualization, which is based upon a Teat project. It also provides another automation solution called JBoss BRMS. Having said that, the JBoss BRMS is a rule engine and it is entirely included in BPM Suite. That means if you have a rule engine and BPM requirements, you will use JBoss BPM Suite. And if you have only rule engines requirement, you will use JBoss BRMS. Now, other technologies, most popular technologies are the app server, JBoss EAP, which is called JBoss Enterprise Application Platform, the in-memory data caching technology called JBoss Data Grid, the mobile platform based upon the recent acquisition of Feed Henry called JBoss Middleware Application Platform, and very recently, even integration, we acquired a company called called 3Scale for API management. Now, apart from these particular technologies, we also provide support for Tomcat, which is we call Enterprise or JBoss Web Server. And all of these technologies are very compatible. That means that compatible with each other. That means your JBoss BPM Suite and JBoss BRMS include JBoss EAP inside it as a container. However, as a runtime, it can run on top of other containers as well, which means that you can take JBoss BPM runtime and make it run on either WebSphere or WebLogic or even JBoss Web Server, which is Tomcat. Now, we highly recommend using JBoss BPM Suite on JBoss EAP because for certain timers and other tasks within BPM, you will require transaction management. Now, coming back to the demo, we will be doing a demo of a sample demo about creating the use cases that we are going to have an organization which wishes to do some level of automation of doing virtual machines related validation. So they will be automating many things like moving their virtual machines from one environment to another environment or provisioning. But in this particular use case, we are just going to create a very simple process of doing a VM validation. Some VM related data will be put in and that validation. Just to be clear, we are not doing any real VM related activity in BPM. We are just going to take a VM as a data model, virtual machine as a data model, and play around, create a rule, simple rule, and create a process. And this demo is going to show you how you create a process. Now, what I've done is that I have installed JBoss BPM Suite 6 over here. And if you look at the JBoss BPM Suite, this is a Business Central. There are many aspects to it. First part is the model. That means you create your business assets. Now, what are the business assets? Business assets are primarily the business processes, the data models, any user forms, the business rules, or any test scenarios or simulations that you create. So all of these forms your part of development. That means you're doing modeling of your business processes, authoring your rules, all of these. These are all stored into a standard repository, Git repository. And after you're done the modeling, you will be doing deployment. And as part of deployment, you will see that you can verify, you can adjust your resources, you can build the package, you can push it to a Git repository, and your execution server can refer to this Git repository, and these particular processes and rules will be executed. Now, because we are talking about BPM, there will be certain processes. You will be able to list those process definitions. You will be able to trigger those particular process to create process instances, and you should be able to also see what has happened to that particular process instance, whether it is stuck somewhere or is it waiting somewhere or is it completed. Now if the particular process is waiting somewhere, that means it is stuck at particular task, then you can manage those tasks. That means you can view personal task, you can view group task, you can claim a task, you can complete that particular task, and also you can create new tasks. Okay. Now after you've completed all of these, your processes are intended to be completed. Over a period of time, you'll have compiling a lot of data, and you will need a monitoring to see that of all the processes that you have created, what has happened to them. How many of these processes have completed, which tasks take most amount of time, so on and so forth. So a complete dashboard of creating those monitoring reports will be available. Now we won't be covering all of these in today's demo. We'll primarily be focusing on model, some level of deployment, and manage process and tasks. Now if we look at the modeling structure, there's a concept of organizations, and within an organization you can have multiple repositories. Within a repository you can have multiple projects, and within a project you can have multiple packages. Now this is how the nesting happens. So today we'll be creating, in today's example, we'll be creating an organization called Acme, and within Acme we'll be creating a repository called VM migration, and a project called migration, and then we'll be creating some packages, or maybe not, but we'll be creating one business process, we'll be creating one business rule, and we will be executing that particular process and looking at an output. Okay, so let's get started. This is how the menu looks like. You have a home, authoring, deploy, process management, task, dashboard, and extensions. Now we'll be primarily focusing in this authoring part. So when I click on authoring, I'll first go to the administration. When I go to the administration, I'll go to the organization units. I'll say manage organization units. Now some of the organization units I've already created, so let me create a new one for this particular demo. I'll be creating, as I told you, an organization called Acme, and I'll keep the default group ID as Acme. I'll say OK. Now I will be creating a repository within an Acme. Over here you can actually clone your existing repository. I will create a new one over here. So I will give it a name, Acme repo, and I'll be putting it under Acme, and I'll do finish. And after I have done this particular, I can check for Acme. I have an Acme repository. Now after I've done this, the first thing I will do is that I'll go to the project authoring part. Now in project authoring, let me change back to my repository, which is Acme, or rather my organization and my repository, which is Acme and Acme repo. And when I click on the new item, if you notice, I can only see project over here. So first I have to create a project before I can create any business asset or artifact. So let me create a project called VM migration. I say OK, and over here I can specify a group ID. So let me specify a group ID, com.acme.vm migration. Okay, or maybe just migration, and then have a VM migration. So I say finish. It says item successfully created. Now after I've done this, I also have made a list of the things that I will be doing. So I created an organization, I created a repository. The next step I'll be doing is I'll be creating a data object. So for this particular thing, you can have a choice of creating your own data object, or over here, or you could create a data object in your IDE, Java IDE. So for example, if you are using JBoss Developer Studio and you create certain Java classes, now that is your plain old Java objects, or beans as you call it popularly, which will have getter and setter. variables and their getter and setter methods. So once you have those data objects, you can export them in a jar file, and you can import that jar file over here. Right now I'm not going to do that. Right now I'm going to create a data object right over here. You have a choice of both creating a data object over here or importing it from your external jar file. Let me create a data object. I'll just be creating one data object called VM instance. Now I'll be putting it under Acme migration, VM migration. And I'll say OK. Now over here I can put in the attributes or the fields. So I'm adding a field called VM instance ID. I'm gonna put it as a big integer and say create. I'm gonna add the next field as name. Obviously, as it suggests, it would be a string. Create. So and so forth. I'll be adding few more fields like created date. It will be of the type date. Host ID, which will be another big integer. I mean, on which host machine, whether a virtual, which physical host machine is it hosted on. It will have its own ID, and then we will have certain other attributes which I have listed over here. Is okay, number of cores, memory is active, is running, and OS type. So let me go one by one. Number of cores, which can be integer. Memory basically in terms of MBs, how much memory you are allocating, and OS type will be a string. I mean, whether it's a Windows or a Linux machine. So create is active. This will be Boolean. Is running. There's another Boolean. Mind you, I mean, most for this today's example, we won't be using most of these attributes, but I still have created all of these just to make good sense out of it. So once I've created a data object, if you look at the source, it actually creates a Java class out of it. If you look at the package name, it says Acme migration, VM migration. And if you look at the structure, it has the getter and setter methods. Okay, I'll do the save. Let's save. Of course, I can validate it as well. Item successfully validated. Now that I've done that, okay, the next step I would like to do is create a rule. Okay, so now for creating a rule, first I'll go over here and I'll say create a new guided rule. So there are multiple ways how you can create a rule. Guided rule is one way. You can also create a guided decision table, or okay, you can have a DRL, which is more technical way of writing a rule. Okay, so and so forth, or you can have your own DSL specified over here. And what are those? Okay, you can always look at the documentation or some of the presentations about what are these that I'm talking about, various options. In this today's example, we will be using a guided rule. So I click on the guided rule. I'll give it a name. And I'll say that VM memory validation. I'll make sure I'm specifying it to a right package, and I'll say OK. And this is how the structure of the rule is. Every rule has left hand side and right hand side. Left hand side is primarily conditions, that means when, and right hand side is the then, that means actions. So let us add some conditions over here. So I say when, and I'm going to choose VM instance. If you remember, I have created a data object called VM instance. Because I've created it locally, it is immediately available. And if I am importing it, I have to make sure that I add that particular jar to my dependency. How we do that, I will explain it later on. But right now, this object is available for me to play around for creating a rule around it. So I'm going to use VM instance to create a rule. So I say OK. there it shows there is a VM instance. I click on it. First thing I'll do is that I'll assign some okay, I'll assign it some variable name, bound variable name, so that I can refer it in the conditions or actions or other actions. Now I'll be adding a restriction or a condition on this particular thing. I'll say that if its status is active, and now it understands this is a boolean, so these are the options it gives. If is active equal to, I'll be selecting a literal value over here, is true, I'll be adding another condition, and I'll say that if the OS type, again it understands OS type is a string, so the operator, okay, accordingly is selected based upon the context, is equal to, I'm currently giving a free field text. I could actually give a combo box using enumeration, but right now let me just keep it simple. So OS type equals to Windows, and another last condition I would wish to add here is that if memory, if you remember, memory was the big integer, so numeric operators are there, is less than 1024. So what I'm doing is that I'm saying that, hey, if the VM instance is active, its OS type is Windows, then its memory should be more than 1024. And if it is not, that means if it matches these conditions, then I will not, okay, so I'll say change field values of virtual machine instance, and I'll say that, hey, please make its active status as false. So literal value, and I will set it to false. So this is the condition, this is the rule that I'm setting. Now because I'll be referring this particular rule in the BPM, so one more activity I will need to do is that I'll click on the options, and then I'll click on the plus sign, and I'll be choosing an attribute. Now over here the attribute I'll be choosing is gonna be rule flow group, and rule flow group I will be giving over here is called as memory, or rather validation. Just I'm doing all the validations at one place, so I'll do validation. So I have given this, okay. Another thing to be on the safe side, you could, and depending upon your needs, you could also provide an attribute called no loop, so that you avoid, okay, if you have multiple rules and each of the rule modifies something on the in the then clause, and that particular attribute is referred in the condition in another rule, and again in the another rule, if it modifies something in the then clause which is used by this particular rule in conditions, then they all will be calling each other infinitely. So to avoid that, we use an attribute called no loop. Right now it's not that relevant in our use case, but it's a good habit to keep it when you find it relevant. So if you look at this, I've created this particular rule, and if you look at the source, this rule is depicted in a very ML manner like this. You have a rule, that is the start of the rule, and it is the end of the rule at the, okay, which with this name end. This is the name of the rule, VM memory validation. Then it says a dialect is ML, rule flow group is validation. So these are all attributes that I've given: dialect, rule flow group, and no loop. And this is a condition. I say that, hey, if there exists a VM instance and I've given it a bound variable name, and the value of is active is true, OS type is Windows, and memory is less than 1024, then I really want, okay, this particular instance, VM instance, set is active state to be false. Okay, so that is how I intend to use this particular rule. So next thing I'll do is that I'll validate this rule. It says item successfully validated, and I'll save this rule. Yeah, of course you can put in any check and comments you wish to. So I have done this particular thing. Okay, so after I have created rule, the next step I will be doing is creating a process itself. So it's a very long set of activities that I'll be doing, so bear with me as I create a process. So I will be clicking on the new item, and I'll say new business process, and I'll give it a name, VM validation, automation, whatever you wish to give. Make sure you are in the same package, but everything else is. I say OK. It takes about 3-4 seconds or 5 seconds for something to come up. If you look at this, it creates, it gives you a kind of a whiteboard wherein you can drag and drop things from the palette, which is on the left hand side, and whatever you have dropped over here, you can select and change the properties on the right hand side. So let me do this thing. Okay, so we have a start, and if you click on the start, you will see these things, okay, on the vicinity. So when you hover your mouse, so I will be creating a process. So first thing depending upon, I'll just create some a gateway, because I know the process in my head, so I'm just creating that particular process. The next thing I'll be doing is I'll be creating a business rules task, and then I'll be creating another gateway. And then I'll be creating from this gateway another task. From this task, I will be joining back to this, and I'll explain it to you in a bit. But let me just complete this particular task. So what I'm doing is that after the start, first activity I'll be doing is validate BPM data, and this will be a business rules task. If it fails, I will manually override it. Okay, I'll ask it to be overridden. And see, I'm actually hovering over a spanner icon over here. I could actually go into the properties on the right hand side and select, okay, for that particular task I can select the task type. If I scroll down, the task type as, there are multiple options over here. In this case, I'm going to choose user. Okay, and I'm going to say that modify VM data for validation. Okay, and this one I'm just gonna, okay, it's gonna be a script task. This is just for the sake of having some visibility. Okay, like print VM data before end. Now I'm not done yet, I've just started. So what I'll be doing is that for this validate VM data, I wish to call that earlier rule that I've created. And the link between a task in a business process and the rules that you have created is rule flow group. If you remember in the rule that we had created, we had provided a rule flow group called validation. So similarly, to match that same name, I'll provide the value of rule flow group as validation over here. So whenever a process instance comes to this particular task, it will actually call all those rules which have rule flow group attribute as validation. Okay. Right now there's just one rule, but if you create more rules with the same rule flow group, then all of those rules will be fired when you come to this particular task. The next thing I will be doing is that in modify VM data, because it's a user task, I'll be assigning it to someone. I can assign it to individual user, or I can assign it to a particular role. So if you want to assign to a role, you'll put it against a group, that role name. If you're assigning to a user, then I'll be putting it under. Let me right now assign it to one particular user through which I'm already logged in. Say Eric CS is the user. Okay. Now let us go step by step. Okay. Now let's print, okay, VM data at the end. Ideally, I have copy pasted the code. So for print, I will be using these two. And the way you can do is that there is a script property over here, and I click on this arrow, select arrow over here. It pops up a window. I'll be writing this. I could write a Java code over here. I'll say system.out.println completed the validation successfully. The is active status is active. Okay, I'll say okay. And I'll come to that, what it basically means and why it will get printed and all those things. But other thing I would wish to do is primarily, okay, make sure that my this XOR, okay, the gateway that I've created, okay, it does something. Now it does understand something. Now one thing I'm going to do over here is that once this comes out of the rule validation, it will come with an outcome. Now this is what the outcome I'll be comparing. So I'll say that if in this particular outcome, in this particular thing, I'll be selecting expression as char, and I'll be putting a script over here, and I'll say return, okay, if VM instance get is active is false, that means this will return true. If this is false, that means it is not active, then I have to modify it. Remember in the rule what we had said is that if the memory size is less than 1024, it will set the value of VM's is active as false. So basically if VM is active becomes false, then in this case it will go through this particular route and will go for modifying VM data. So it will wait for a user to modify that data and hopefully give the memory higher than 1024, so that next time it, okay, it again goes back, again it's validated, and then next time it passes and goes to print VM data and end. Obviously the next, okay, for this one the expression would be just the opposite of it. So it would be just VM instance dot get is active. That's it. Okay. Now how do you know, okay, how do you start a process? That whenever there is a process, there is a user form associated with that, or when there is a human task, there's a user form associated with that. So basically in this particular use case, in this particular process, if you look at it, you will have two user forms. One is at the process level and one will be at the user level. But before we talk about this thing, we have to assign certain variables at the process level and do the mapping of those variables at the user task level. So first thing I will do is I will be making sure that at this particular modify VM data for validation level, or rather at the process level, I'll do some assignments. So I'll go over here, and if you see variable definitions mentioned over here, I'll click over here and I'll say add variable, and I'll be putting VM instance, and mind you this has to match with whatever this is.out I have printed over there. And defined variable is the one which I've already created, VM instance. Okay. Acme migration, and I'll say okay. After I've done this variable definition, I'll be using it somewhere. Now where would I use it? I will be using it at this level, at the user level, user task level. What I will do is that I'll select data input set, and I'll say add data input, and I'll say VM instance in, and the defined data type is Acme migration, VM migration. I say okay. Similarly, output also will be the same. I'll say VM instance out, and the defined variable would be okay, of the type. Let's say okay. Now I'm gonna do the map assignment. Over here I'll say input mapping. For data input, I'll be selecting VM instance, and I'll be mapping that to is map to VM instance in. And I'll be doing output mapping, and I'll be selecting VM instance out, and I'll be mapping it against VM instance. Okay, I'll say okay. Now this is what I have done. The next thing I have to do, okay, I haven't documented that, but I will document it subsequently, is that for your business rules task, okay, you basically have to add that particular on entry. Okay, now what that has to be, let me just collect it. I'll pause here for a minute and I'll be back. So give me a minute, or maybe I'll pull it from, okay, I will pull it from another process that I have. Finally, k context dot go to my BPM process. I'll come to my rules and on entry. I'll make sure I'm inserting VM instance. Say okay. So that VM instance is available for your rules to execute. Now I will go back and I'll check whether I have done all the steps. I've created a rule, I created a process, I did a start, I did a gateway, I did a business rules task, and okay, I'll add that to the documentation. And I have done XOR gateway, I have done two conditions. Then I have done user task, modify VM data assigned to logged in user. I have done script and data input and data output mappings we have to do. In a script task, you have to print VM data in the end. And at the process level, you have to specify variable definitions, VM instance, and at modify VM data, data input set. Oh, I've actually done that. Okay, assignments, generate all the user forms. Now this is the next step we will be doing, but before that, you could actually, okay, say start validation. It has started validation. If there had been any validation error, it will mention over here. Now this is where it mentions, okay, one particular error, the sum of probability values. Now this you could ignore. Okay, it says that the sequence flow must be, okay, the probability values of all outgoing sequence flows must be 100. This is primarily for simulation. Now just to get over this problem, okay, one way you can do is that you can click on this particular arrow and you scroll down and see that probability is 50%. And similarly for another one, you can see probability. You can, in a real life scenario, you'll have to specify what those things are. Now over here, okay, user task has no task name. Okay, now okay, we have given it a name, but we have to give it a task name as well. So we should be sure about that. Okay, this is how the real-time validation happens. Every time we do anything, okay, that validation takes place. So we don't have to click it again and again because it's continuously validating unless you explicitly stop it. So next thing I'll do is that I'll save this. I'll say okay. And I've saved this particular business process. After you're done this, you'll be creating the user forms. And one way to create user forms is that you click on this particular icon over here, and you see that generate all forms. So once I click on this, you'll see that at least two forms are added over here. So I say generate all forms, and when I see that it says successfully created forms, one form will be at the process level. So I have a VM validation automation as a business process, and we have a task form. So click on this particular automation task form. I'm not going to do any modification. I'm just going to show you what it created. So all the attributes of VM instance, it has put it down. I could change them, I could modify them, and all those things I could do. Right now I'm not going to do anything. I could change the labels and all those things. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to keep as it is. Okay, similarly for VM validation, modify VM data for validation, there's a form created, and it's similar because over there as well we are referring to VM instance. Okay, so all these forms are automatically created. In a real life scenario, in your actual project, you might not be using these forms. You might be creating your own custom UI, and you will be calling, okay, all of these through REST APIs. Okay, so that's an option for you. Now, I have done this. I've created forms. The next step, obviously, okay, is gonna be, I will be, okay, keep validation on, save. Okay, I've done that, and I'll be save and build project. So let me come back to the, okay, BPM N2, make sure it is saved. Okay, I think I had saved it last time around, but anyway, I wanted to make sure that I've saved it. And now I'm going to save and build project, and I'm going to change the version accordingly. So I'll say click on the open project editor. It's a VM migration. I don't know whether I saved it and built it last time, but let me just change the version to 1.1 or maybe 1.0.1, and I say save. Okay, saved successfully, and I'll say build and deploy. Build successful. So primarily what it has done is that it has gone on the server side and done a successful build deployment. Okay. Now, after I've done this, when I go onto the process management tab and I see process definitions, okay, what I'll see is that I'll see a lot of processes over here, but primarily, okay, this is the process of my interest, VM validation automation. So I'll click over here and I'll click on this action start. I'll click on this action, and that user form will come up. And in this particular user form, I think it has sorted this attributes based upon alphabetically. So created date is on top, but as I told you, you can go to the form and you can move things around, which I haven't done it, but it's all right. This is a demo. So I selected a date. I give some host ID. I don't care. I want to make sure I select is active, is running, doesn't matter in this particular case. Memory, I'm trying, okay, I will make sure I'm assigning something less than 1024. That's the rule that I have created. Instance is that Windows, I mean, again, it could be 2013, web server, doesn't matter. Number of cores doesn't matter. OS type does matter in our use case, so we are putting it Windows. That's what it will be. And again, I don't care, okay, what the instance ID is, and I say submit. So when I submit, I expect it to be stuck at the human task if it is not failing. Okay, so now that I have executed it, I'll go to the process instances. And if you see that, okay, this particular process instance is not stuck at VM validation automation. Okay, now how do I know that? Sorry, this particular process instance is the name VM validation, and where is it stuck now? So one way you can check is that options, and you can see process model. So it tells you that, okay, the path it navigated, it went to and validate, okay, went through the rule, validate VM data, and it failed that particular rule, and that's why it went over here, modify VM data for validation. Okay, so it is waiting for a user to execute that particular process. So I close this and I go to the task menu. So I go and I say click on the task list. So when I click on the task list, if you remember, that particular user task was assigned to same user that I'm logged in. But if it is assigned to some other user and you log in by that particular user, you should be able to see it in your task list. So I click on this particular task list and I say, okay, start this particular task. I'm now starting working on this particular task. It pre-populates all of these things. Now remember, because it has failed, I have made it is active as false. So first thing is that I'll make is active as true, and I'll change the memory to 1024. Now this should pass. Okay, and after this I will be clicking on complete, and hopefully after this particular process instance should be completed. So I say complete, and this particular task is gone, and this particular instance is also gone. So if I click on completed, that particular is completed. When I click on it and I say options, process model, it shows me eventually it completed. It shows me all the paths, all the grayed out area is the task it actually completed. In this use case, it completed all the tasks, okay? And some of them twice. For example, validate VM data was, okay, done twice. So this is how you would know, okay? You could also look at the process variables at each stage, whatever that wait stage is. Now, here's what, okay, we did was we created a process, we, okay, made sure that the rules were called and all those things, and based upon the rules, that particular process was navigated accordingly. Now, if you go to the dashboard, process task and dashboard, you look at it, okay, it shows VM instances by process. I mean, I had a test process earlier as well, and I had VM validation automation process. So I had 10 instances of the test process. I had one instance of VM validation automation. Now, if I create another, say suppose a process definition, I go back and I create another instance of this particular process. I say, okay, now, okay, and is active, is running. Let me give a higher memory. Okay, say 1024. Name, another Windows machine, number of course 2, OS type to Windows, VM instance ID, and it's access password 331, doesn't matter, I'll say submit. Now this time it won't go to a human task because it is having 1024 memory, so hopefully it should be successfully completed. If I go to the process instances, it is not listed over here. It will be listed in the completed okay, one, and maybe I'm looking at the older one, but it is shown under the completed one. So I will go back to the dashboard and I'll say process and task dashboard. See, if you look at this, value has now become 2. So this is a real-time dashboard that it automatically creates, and whatever process you have created, it actually lists down. I can drill down into this. I'll say, okay, in VM validation automation, I'll drill down, or in a test process, I can drill down and whatever thing happens. So in VM validation, I click on this particular thing, it drills down into it, and it shows me, okay, what processes were initiated at what time, whom, by, okay, what date and what process durations. So one took certain time, 50 seconds, another took 1 minute, 40 seconds, something like that. So you have a lot of metrics being collected over here. So with this, okay, my demo comes to an end. I just wanted to reiterate what we showed and what we covered over here, and I just wanted to make sure, okay, you are able to see, okay, what we created. So let me go to the right one, Acme. So over here we had created a couple of artifacts. One is primarily, as this loads, okay, this is loading the another process which I'm not interested in seeing. Let me open my process which I created over here, and this is my process. So this is my simple process, a start. I'll be doing a validation, which is a business rule task, and after that I'll be, okay, checking whether it passed in the business rule or it needs a human intervention. So if it needs a human intervention, it is going to this particular task. If it doesn't, then it will be going to the next task. And of course, we have done some sys.out, and all of these sys.out would be eventually, okay, listed and printed over here. We didn't had a look at it, but yeah, I mean, these processes were completed. If you look at these particular messages, successfully completed, and okay, completed the validation successfully. Okay, all of these, okay, this active status is true, and all those things are mentioned over here. So coming back to this particular use case, okay, it passed this particular thing either first time if you have given 1024 or more memory, or if you have given less than that, it will go to a human task. We had also seen that we had created a rule. So we had created a VM memory validation rule. You can also have a course validation rule, or you could have a Okay, OS type validation rule, whatever rules you create, make sure you give the rule flow group as validations, so that in this particular stage, at this particular task, all those rules that you have created would be fired. Okay, so, and we had also seen at the, okay, how you can instantiate, you can look at the process definitions and you can instantiate the that particular processes. You can look at those particular process instances. You can look at the tasks. You can claim those particular tasks or start those particular tasks and complete them. And also you can have a look at the dashboard and the process and task dashboard. Okay, so with this I end my demo. Thank you for your patience for listening this, and I will be posting this document as well over there, and a link to documentation, product documentation. So thank you, and have a nice rest of the day, and enjoy working with JBoss BPM Suite.